So whilst AI is going to change the way people work and it will put people out of jobs, it will also then create jobs because people will need to be able to drive, able to prompt, able to build out workflows. There'll be jobs in the next year or two that are essentially prompt engineers.
On today's episode, we're joined by Oliver Bruce, founder of Pinpoint Media. Despite living with ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia, Oliver has built a thriving creative agency from scratch, overcoming challenges with resilience, innovation and strategic thinking. He'll share with us his journey from university startup to leading a full-service media agency, the lessons he has learned from failures and the future of AI in business. Let's head over to the podcast. Today, I'm pleased to have Oliver Bruce on the We Built This Business podcast, talking about Pinpoint Media. Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Oliver, wanted to hear about Pinpoint Media. Could you tell me, what is Pinpoint Media all about?
Yeah, fine. So Pinpoint Media is a performance and creative agency. I started it whilst I was at university. I built the business through just filming content for clients and then understanding how best to distribute that content. We then hired an individual whilst I was still at university. Then we graduated university with a business, with a member of staff, and with an office for that matter. And it's kind of grown and snowballed over the last, 10 years or so to where it is today.
Fantastic. So when you started the business, you were already at university. Which university were you at, and what was the reason for starting the business while you were actually at university?
So I went to the University of Gloucestershire, so in the Cotswolds. I went to that university specifically because the media course was very good. So I wanted to get into television, get into broadcast, get into media specifically. Hence going to that university to study that course, which then led me into understanding and enjoying and having a passion for creating content. Now, this being 10 years ago was sort of before the content boom, if you will. So businesses, fine, they had a website, they had some photos, and maybe they had a video or two on the website, but it wasn't the sort of mass market that it is today where people really understand the power of creative and the power of content. So picking up a camera and shooting brands and businesses with a kind of quite unique and bespoke business model, which was essentially economies of scale. So we'd do multiple videos for multiple clients across a day, for instance, and the price per video would be a couple of £100. The economies of scale would mean that there was margin there. And that was how we started out fully organically. So that was really where the passion lay, and that was why I started the business all those years ago.
Fantastic. So moving to today, and then we'll go back and just delve into that a little bit further. What does Pinpoint Media look like today? How many staff have you got? Where are you located? And what's your current offering?
So it's very different to what it was when we started. So there's sort of 30-ish of us now. We've got offices in Cape Town, London, and then one in the Cotswolds in Cheltenham where we started. Which is where I am today. We acquired a performance agency at the beginning of 2024, latter half of 23, early 24, called Nova Plus, which we brought into Pinpoint Media or Pinpoint Group or however you want to term it, to assist us with our performance offering. So it's incredibly different to when it started, which was fundamentally just creative video content. It's now very much the strategy, the distribution, the planning, the creative, and everything that goes in between. So we are a full service agency within reason, working with clients sort of start to finish on ideation through to distribution.
I see. So I'm just trying to think about the offering that you've currently got at the moment. The company that you acquired, what is it specifically that they did that you needed?
So we worked with them for a year or so, sort of farming out the performance piece that we didn't have the capacity to do internally. And building those sort of relationships with a business in an organic way like that just kind of meant that we realized that we were giving them so much money and they were working so closely with us that it maybe made sense to bang them together, to which we did. And Nova Plus joined Pinpoint Media, and obviously we've retained staff and clients, etc., and grown because of that. There's been turbulence in the acquisition piece, as there always is when you acquire a business. It's never as simple as just banging two together and 2 + 2 equaling 5. We maybe thought it was naively at the time, but we learned a lot of lessons along the way in terms of how to properly integrate a business. And having never bought a business before and done it fully organically, it was a hell of an experience, and one that I'd absolutely do again, but just do very, very differently.
Well, one piece of advice would you give to someone who is looking to acquire a business, following just going through one?
Yeah, build out an idealistic timeline and times that by 2. because the reality is, even if you do buy the business in 6, 12, 18 months, whatever that might be, actually integrating the business into your workflow is never easy. It hasn't been easy. It isn't easy for a lot of businesses that do it, no matter how big they are, because there's different cultures, there's different ways of working, etc. And if I was potentially to do it again, I would have potentially delayed the way that we integrated the business. So, yep, acquire it, that's fine, but still let them run fairly independently and fairly separately for a year, for instance, to understand where those two efficiencies are and what works well in one business might not work well in the other business, and then work out that integration piece. What we essentially did was buy the business and then go, right, in the next 6 months, we're going to have fully integrated it. We're going to pay all the staff over. We're going to change all the client contracts, and one is going to be a singular brand, if that makes sense. So that was the idealistic. The reality is, it's never as simple as that. So yeah, be prepared for it to take a hell of a lot longer than your ideal.
That's really good advice. We've been through, it's not something quite an acquisition, but we had two businesses. We had an agency business and we had a delivery business, and they were basically trading from each other so much, we decided to merge. Even though we're in the same building, it's still taken 9 months to completely fully integrate the two.
Exactly. I mean, the simplest of transactions in your mind is just not simple when it comes to the legalities of everything. I mean, the way that lawyers like to elongate these processes is just the most painful thing in the world. And, you know, that was the only bit I didn't enjoy, was all the legal ramifications around the acquisition piece, because, you know, whilst you're friends with the business that you're acquiring, you're still having to deal with their lawyer, who's obviously protecting them from the downside, and your lawyer's protecting you from the downside. So there's an element of friction just doesn't need to be there. And one of our advisors within our business, we've got a good board of NEDs, basically said, build the deal out, work the deal through as sort of on a friendly basis, you know, sort of off the record to a certain extent, and then tell the solicitors what you actually want to achieve, rather than the solicitors telling you what you need to achieve, because they'll just look at the pounds, penny and pence and just make sure that essentially they can take as long as they need to take to get as much money as they can get. That was the reality or the experience in our acquisition. Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure that experience is kind of multiplied across every acquisition, because end of the day, lawyers are paid on time, aren't they? So if it takes longer, it's good for them.
And go with recommendations, you know, go with people that have done it before and lawyers that have done or been recommended, because there are great lawyers out there, and there are great individuals that will help you on going through the M&A process. But just make sure that you are comfortable with the people that you're using, because you're going to spend a hell of a lot of time on the phone to these guys.
Yeah. So Oliver, I wanted to kind of move back to when you were at school now.
Yeah.
So obviously you started the business, you know, coming into university, which is, you know, fantastic. But how were you as a child at school?
Yeah, not brilliant, Daniel, to be fair. I went to 7 schools, basically. So, you know, as a starter for 10, anyone that goes to 7 schools is going to find it hard to actually build any sort of friendship with anybody. The reason for that, parents in the military, so moved around a lot, but also just didn't get academia. So I wasn't engaged. I wasn't interested in the process and the way that school worked. Coming back from being overseas, I was dropped down a year at one of my schools as well. That was then compounded with having dyslexia and dyspraxia. So it was a perfect storm, essentially. And, you know, whilst it was useful going to so many different schools because you met so many different individuals, it wasn't useful in terms of an education. And I really sort of found myself when I went to college to study, again, television and media. I did a BTEC at a college. I only got 1 GCSE when I left school, so really I couldn't do a huge amount. Didn't really want to go to 6th form, so went to a college to study this BTEC course. Managed to do really well at that BTEC course, got a distinction, and then went on to university. But it was really the sort of latter half of my education that I really enjoyed, which was the college and the university. That was where I found myself. That was where I built friendships, and that was kind of where I found the passion for what I wanted to do.
Do you feel like the school system wasn't set up for, like you were saying, you know, if you have ADHD or dyslexia, you know, those sorts of, the school system is based around exam-based learning, isn't it, effectively? How did you kind of take that into college and then onto university?
I think it's finding, you're absolutely right. So the school system is very much based on ticking boxes to a certain extent and making sure that everyone can study the same thing. There's nothing bespoke to an individual. So prime example was when I was doing my history GCSE mock exams. I was doing the mock exam in World War II, essentially. That was what the mock exam was about. Now, I love history and I love World War II and I love all the stuff that comes with that. You know, I've watched every box set for Band of Brothers that there is.
Same.
And I
Yes.
Who hasn't? And I got a great mock GCSE result. I was like, great, I got an A in that mock exam. But the reason I got an A was because I found it interesting. Then what we did was we did medicine for the actual GCSE exam, and I got a D, right, which wasn't what I needed, which wasn't good enough. And that's because I didn't find it interesting. I didn't have the passion. So I think the way the school system works is very different, and I understand why, because it has to sort of fit a mold of everybody rather than a specific niche. But going to college to actually study something that I found interesting meant that I applied myself in a way whereby I maybe didn't apply myself at school, because I wanted to double down and do it because I had a genuine interest in what that topic was. And I know the school system can't change for everybody in that sense, but there is an argument to say that, bespoke classes or finding something at school that you're passionate about, be that sport or whatever it might be, is typically where individuals, in my instance, with dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, neurodiverse, whatever, tend to excel because they can really enjoy the subject and thus apply themselves.
So where did your passion come for media and content creation?
So in essence, I always wanted to be a presenter on TV. I'd sort of, watched Top Gear, I'd watched all these programs, and I thought, it was quite fun being a TV presenter, and actually, how hard can it actually be to get into that industry? But the reality is pretty difficult unless you want to start at the bottom as a runner making cups of tea and work your way up over 30 years or so. But having done research on people like Rowan Atkinson and Clarkson and all these sort of individuals, they've got their own production companies, and that's how they somewhat control the production of the content or the creative or the TV show that they're presenting at that time. So I figured that maybe starting a production company was the way to break TV quicker. So at college, I had a production company called Straight Line Productions. And that was, we did a gym video for 50 quid. And I was like, this is amazing. We've made some money. We've done a video for a client. It clearly works. Then going into university, sort of doubled down on that video piece, developed an app that had video integrated into it, realized people were only using the app for the fact that the company got this video for a very low cost. And that was kind of where it all started. But the reason I did media was specifically because I wanted to be in television in some way, shape or form. But now it's so much more accessible with things like this.
We all have the ability to be on television in our pocket now, don't we? We've got one device that we can, speak to millions of people, and we don't need to go in front of a TV studio. I think it was, who's the guy that runs the High Performance podcast?
Jake Humphreys,
yeah, he was saying that people come up to him now and say, oh, I wish it was as easy as it was when you were around to get into TV like you did. And he was like, hang on a minute. He's like, it's never been easier now to get on in front of people than at any point in the time of history. It's so accessible.
We're working quite closely as a separate entity that we're launching soon. I don't know when this goes out. It might be out by that point. That is integrated in the world of television, but also integrated in the world of what we call broadcast 2.0. So it's very much, as you say, television in your pocket, and it has never been easier. We're working with the Sony, for instance, to come up with and develop this creative concept and this show. But you're absolutely right. Anyone can get into basically any line of work now, because it is so much more accessible, just to be seen, to be heard, and to have a voice, which I think is great.
Yeah, definitely. So when you move into university, you told us a little bit about starting the business. You said did you start with someone else, did you say?
No, so I started at university on my own for about 6 months, and then I met my then business partner at a house party. So he was going out with this girl that lived there. Met him. He was an entrepreneur. He'd started a clothing brand, and the clothing brand hadn't worked and hadn't gone as well as he'd wanted to. So he'd got out of it, and he was looking for sort of something else. So because Pinpoint at the time was something, it was a going concern, only making small amounts of money, but he'd done something before. I thought that it was good to maybe go 50-50 on the business, which in hindsight was good and bad. Learned lots of lessons, had a great time with him, but at the point that he was out of the business, still then had to find essentially 50% of the value of the company. And again, we didn't have a very good lawyer back then because we didn't have the budget to be able to get a good lawyer. So we just went, well, how much have we turned over? Okay, we've turned over that much. Well, 50% of that is this. And that isn't the reality. So it cost me an arm and a leg comparatively to what it could have cost me. But it was a good 3 years, and yeah, I don't regret it, but I should have structured it very, very differently. And if ever I'm going into business with anyone ever again, we need to make sure that there isn't a 50-50 split, and either one person's got majority and the other's got minority, or vice versa, because that way decisions can be made rather than there being some sort of loggerhead.
Yeah, I think that's a especially when you're starting out, because if you, like you said, 50-50, everything's sweet at the start. Everyone is, on the same journey, the same train. And then as soon as that starts to fracture, you're paralyzed, aren't you? You can't move forward.
Exactly. And unless you change the share classes, which we learnt in hindsight, or unless you have someone with 1% or whatever that might be, or you have an advisor with the final say, or there are ways of structuring it. But when I was, 18, 19, and I started this business and I thought, great, 50-50 means we're going to put equal amounts of time into it. And you do for the first few years. But then if someone is 3, 4, 5, 6 years older than you, they're going to have different life priorities quicker than you are, and they're going to want to do other stuff, right? So hadn't factored that into the whole equation. And when he got to 25, 26, he wanted to dial out of the business because he wanted to go and do other shit, right? Whereas I was still very much wanting to scale this thing. So yeah, I think it was horses for courses, but learned a lot of lessons through that. And then the next time I did it was structured very differently.
Yeah. So at what point did you kind of get to when you were like, Pinpoint Media is going to work?
I've always thought it's going to work, otherwise I'd never have done it, I guess. Well, years when I started it, I was so naive to what business is, what creative is, what actually running a company is, that I'd never thought it would fail, because I was like, well, if you're selling something for £1 and it costs you 50p, then it can't fail. I didn't factor into it anything around, corporation tax, PAYE, anything like that until I was actually doing it. And if I'd maybe written a business plan out and looked at what an agency might look like and look at what creative might look like, it might not have stacked up then. But over time, you learn, you compound, you change, you pivot, and you work out what does work in the market. We've been lucky enough to have grown sufficiently year on year and to pivot quickly enough in certain areas to be able to keep it sustainable. But our true kind of inflection point, the part of the journey whereby it starts to really become something bigger than the sum of its parts, was sort of just before the pandemic and then during, because the pandemic allowed us to sort of dial out of the business slightly, take a CBILS loan, put people on furlough and go, where the fuck do we want this thing to go? Do we want to just do video forever? Or do we want to do something that's a little bit more ingrained and adds a lot more value to our clients, whereby we can say, this video is going to drive this many leads, it's going to get this much return on investment, build out a strategy where they can actually plan for a year. And the answer was, that's exactly where we want to go, rather than just producing video content. So that was the big inflection point for me. And that was when I started to see it change into something else. And then it's grown year on year since then.
So the pandemic for you was actually almost like a reset.
It was a reset, and we had other things going on, and I pivoted into another line of business to seize the moment, if you will, and that was a big mistake, but arguably one that I don't necessarily regret. But that's where all my hair's gone. But yeah, it was a moment for everyone to sort of come together and go, where do we want this business to go, and how do we want to grow this business? We took on 12 Kickstarters at the end of the pandemic. We invested a lot of capital into good team members in the pandemic as well through the CBILS scheme. So that was the only debt that we'd ever taken, was a CBILS loan from the government during the pandemic. But I think is the cheapest debt you'll ever get, but also if used correctly, really valuable. So that was an important point for us. Not that we necessarily knew it at the time. But yeah, looking back on it, the pandemic, whilst horrible in many ways, personally and from a business perspective, was actually somewhat useful because we could dial back.
Yeah. So this other business that you got into, that you said was a mistake, what was it? Was it in the same line of work?
No, it was a different line. So I had some contacts in the UK who did logistics and distribution. So I worked with these guys on distribution of essentially landed product in the UK to organisations. So hand sanitizer units specifically. So if you went to a tube station or you went to a pub when they reopened, and you saw these hand sanitizer units that you could put your hand under and it automatically squirts out liquids, we were involved in the distribution and the procurement of those, as well as a number of other things that we distributed to businesses, which was great. And we had an amazing order from Amazon for £12 million, and we were landing the product and we were distributing the products, and it was all going very, very well, apart from the fact that they then cancelled the order after we'd factored the actual cash, because we didn't have the cash to buy this stuff, right? So we had to factor the fact that they'd raised a purchase order for us to be able to buy the product, then obviously pay Amazon, pay the debt back on a weekly basis at that point. And then it just so happened on the penultimate order that they pulled the rug from underneath us. And that was essentially where the profit was, which we were going to reinvest directly back into the business. But it all went Pete Tong. and it just didn't work. And it reads as a brilliant headline, and we helped loads of people, and we gave away loads of products because we had surplus, but we just couldn't flip and shift the stuff with Amazon because they claimed that it wasn't selling, which was complete bollocks. So yeah, Invoice Fair, which was the factoring company, great guys, are currently going through legals at the moment, literally still with them. They'll never get the money back, but it's more a principle.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some stories over the years of Amazon, and was it that they started doing it in-house?
Well, we don't know. It was all landed, and 11 of the shipments out of 12 had landed in the UK, and had all been taken, and they claimed that they were selling, and then they claimed that it wasn't selling all of a sudden, despite every single 33 million units being with them. So they said, we can charge you for storage. We were like, well, we haven't got the capital to pay you for storage. Or they said, we can try and shift them, but we're shifting them across cost price. And we're like, well, we can't, we're in a rock and a hard place here, right?
Yeah.
So there was absolutely bugger all that we could do, apart from chalk it down to one hell of an experience. And thankfully, because of the way the company was structured, because there was already a trading entity with these individuals that had the distribution mechanism, we were able to ring fence it in a certain way whereby it didn't impact anything or anybody. It was just a company that was trading for a very brief period of time with a hell of a turnover. And we were fucked over by Amazon. And, it was a hell of a lesson. Fascinating. Would I want to go back to it? No. Did I learn a lot? Yes, I did. A huge amount. Because that was the point that we realised what business actually was. Because we were dealing with millions of pounds on a weekly, on a monthly basis, rather than hundreds of thousands of pounds or tens of thousands of pounds or whatever it was back then. And I met some amazing people who I still speak to today.
Yeah. And that journey, I suppose, is only going to help you further because, like you say, you almost, a bit like an elastic band, aren't they, people? Once you get used to dealing with that sort of money, suddenly when you go back to dealing with hundreds of thousands again, you're like, there's no problem.
What it did for us is it made us realise what value was, because we'd always undervalued our services and ourselves because we were too scared of asking for the true value. And when we saw a commodity that was selling for such a rallied price, we realised that actually we'd always been underselling ourselves. So it gave us that confidence to be able to charge the real value for our team to do a proper job. And you can see it. You can see the way that we changed our pricing model. You can see the way that we changed our working structure. And that was all off the lessons that we learned, because actually it isn't scary just saying a number, because what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Someone could just say no. And you go, okay, well, what is your number? And then you work it back from there. Whereas we were always too scared because it was so hand to mouth and so bootstrapped that actually if someone said no, you'd be like, fuck, that's the business gone. They're not going to pay us. But actually everything is up for negotiation and conversation, it seems.
So your pricing structure changed. How did you change it? Have you changed it to more a revenue share model?
Well, the way that we used to have it was an economy of scale. So you buy one video, it costs you X. You buy 3 videos, it costs you Y. And there's an element of that being useful from a long-term point of view when we're actually mapping out creative content, but it's not our core. For instance, we'd be charging it based on a project fee now. So if a client wants X, then we'd go, how many days is it going to take? Well, this is going to be the cost. Rather than a client going, I want 12 pieces of content, and we go, great, well, it's £300 per content times by 12, which is how we used to structure it, which when we were probably 8 people big with minimal overheads kind of made sense, right? Because there was no real outgoing bar salaries in a small office. But as we get bigger and as we had more expensive staff and we had a CBILS loan and debt to pay back, we had to think of how we could structure it in a better way, which was how most agencies structure themselves. So we were running it as a lifestyle business, not that we were running it for our own lifestyle, but we were running it in a way that when I started it as 1 or 2 people, we'd always run it. We'd never really change that. But again, I was, early mid-20s at the time. So I had no experience in business or just generally how to run anything. And you learn that way. Very rarely is the first business that anyone starts the business that makes them successful, whatever successful is in their mind or in your mind. It's the second or the third business that they do because of all the shit that they've learned from the previous ones. And I think that's so important. I keep reminding myself of that you will fuck up more times than you will succeed. But in the long run, as long as you succeed in some way, shape or form, then that's okay, as long as you're learning from it.
I think that's very powerful because so many people, especially, they don't want to fail at any point, but you have to because that's how you learn. That's what it's all about. Borrowing money. So you said that Pinpoint has been bootstrapped until the CBILS loan. How was it bootstrapping a company, and would you do it again?
No, I wouldn't do it again. And fucking difficult, to be brutally honest. And that's the honest truth, because we could have grown 3 or 4 times faster, right? If we'd raised angel tickets or had PE investment or VC money or whatever back in the early stages, because we'd have been able to hire amazing people from day one rather than hiring one or two amazing people over the course of a year. Because every pound or penny that came in the business, we would save or we would spend, right? Whereas if we have an injection of capital, you can get the structure correct, you can get everything right, and then you can go and smash it. Whereas we were trying to smash it and then trying to hire people to help us smash it before we necessarily had the people to actually get there. So it was putting the cart before the horse in some instances when you're bootstrapping something. But I do think people that bootstrap a business have a far more valuable interaction or relationship with their business because they look at everything in such detail. You see in the economy right now with the VC-backed businesses, right, there is a huge amount of turbulence going on because all the VCs in the pandemic were pumping capital into SaaS businesses. Now they're pumping capital into AI businesses, but none of them are making a profit, right? To bootstrap a business, you fundamentally have to make profit to be able to get through to the next year to then reinvest properly. Whereas with VC businesses, you can have a burn rate of 3 years, right, and not need to worry about making a profit. So I don't think it's something I'd do again because it is so difficult, but I've done it and I'm happy that I've done it because I've learned so many lessons around how to read a balance sheet, how to read the P&L, how to make sure that every pound that we're spending is going to drive some kind of return on investment, so that if ever I went down the angel or the VC route or the PE route, for instance, I would be able to answer questions maybe in more detail than someone who's only ever had VC money pumped into their business, because you have a completely different relationship with it. So really difficult, really, really difficult. Don't regret it. But again, would I advise it? Maybe I would. I think it's a good thing for people to go into business and try and build something organically. And then when it's profitable, maybe go and find some money. But don't rely on someone else's capital just to start, because the reality is it may never actually make profit and it might just fall over.
Yeah, it's good advice. We're 12 years in and we've been bootstrapped since day one. We did, I think we did a bounce back loan in the pandemic times, which again is the only money we borrowed. And yeah, we're now looking into raising funds for that very reason. Like you said, we've realised that we were able to utilise that bounce back loan to bring better people into the business, which is growing the business, which enables us to grow faster, which enables us to employ more people. So that's the reality. It does speed the process up. But it's like you say, only once you've got almost a product or service that you can actually replicate, once you know that works, then it's a lot easier to commit that money into it.
Exactly. And you sometimes, there are so many great businesses out there that are VC backed, but I know a few stories of late of businesses that are VC backed, so they're still making a loss 5 years later. And the reality is the VCs don't want to pump any more capital in, right? So what happens? Well, you've got to get rid of a load of people. You've got to cut your overheads, but you're not going to be able to cut them by that much to be able to break even or make profit in most instances. So you've got to reinvent the wheel to a certain extent. And it is difficult. Business is not easy. Everyone's got a totally different story. You do have wins and the wins are great. But more often than not, you'll go through life and you'll constantly come up against a barrier. You'll constantly come up against something that isn't allowing you to break through. And more often than not, it's because of cash flow. Yeah.
You mentioned AI just a minute ago. So I believe you're involved in a couple of enterprises resulting in AI technology. Could you tell us a little bit more about those and what the kind of impact on yourself and the company is?
So AI, we've always used, over the last sort of 2 years or so, we've baked AI into our workflow massively. We've been quite a bullish agency on using tech fundamentally and how we can better the experience for our clients through VR or AR or AI, for instance. So I've invested in OpenAI. I've invested in SpaceX as well. We have an element of obviously FutureTech built into that. We've got our own tech stack called Core AI. So we've built that out specifically for the marketing workflow. So it does all the heavy lifting from sort of the ideation all the way through to the distribution planning. Doesn't yet do the generative creative, but that's because so many people out there are focused on the gen creative bit and not necessarily the bit that comes before that. We've tried to alleviate it a little bit more. So sort of look at what the masses are doing and sort of do the opposite, I guess. AI is changing the world. It's obvious to see. I think people are concerned about it, and at the beginning of this year, people were looking at investing heavily into how AI can improve efficiencies within businesses. But I think people have realized that it's a lot harder to implement than just plugging something in. And I think we're still 18 months, 24 months off actually businesses using it in their actual workflow as a norm. We're seeing a lot of businesses, we work with a lot of blue chips with Core AI, and actually it's a lot harder to implement it right now across the whole business than we actually assumed it would be. So it's kind of use cases of putting it in and 20 people using it, 30 people using it, 40 people using it, rather than, okay, we'll bake it in now and it'll be used by 1,000 people from day one. We can see these use cases are going to be in place for a year or so until they can see the results. So there are budgets out there. There are big budgets out there for businesses to use AI, and they have to spend it and they have to understand and they have to implement this sort of AI tech stack in whatever form that might be. But there is no market leader in terms of where people are putting all of their money. People are spread betting at the moment, we're seeing. It will change the way marketing works. It will change the way legals work, accountants work, most businesses, period. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be overnight like people maybe thought at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. I mean, with AI, I think it's probably going to have as big an impact on work as the internet did.
Oh, period. Without a shadow of a doubt. It just is. And it's the dot-com boom of the current era, right? People are putting a lot of money into anything that has the word AI in front of it, even if it doesn't actually have AI in it. I mean, a lot of artificial intelligence that people are saying that they are using isn't proprietary. So it's built on an LLM, for instance, Claude or Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT model, for instance. And actually 1% maybe of businesses in the world actually own their own LLM, their own foundation, essentially, not even LLM, but the foundation of the artificial intelligence workflow. But yet all these investors are going, yeah, fuck it, let's chuck a load of money into this, even though it's actually just built on a platform that is kind of already out there and you just remodeled it, which is great because it's making it work for people. But it's just really interesting, the perception on what is proprietary and what is actually just built on another foundational model.
One of your quotes that you said to me before we started, which was, don't rush into anything.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that AI is potentially at that point at the moment where companies, like you say, are rushing into it, but they don't actually know what they're looking to achieve from it?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of businesses just want to have it in their artillery or arsenal to be able to say that they can deploy it. When we go through RFP processes, they say, how are you using AI? How can you use AI? All this kind of stuff. So it's a bบlike the NFT era, right? During the pandemic, where every fucker was going, I'm going to buy a monkey or I'm going to buy whatever it might be on OpenSea. And I get that, but everybody decided that NFTs was the future, and to the technology behind a non-fungible token makes absolute sense, but it's not going to be artwork specifically. But I think AI is very similar to that, where everyone's got this sort of buzzword of shit, AI is the future, is what we need to be doing. So let's say that we have everything driven by AI. I think one needs to understand how best it works before they can actually fully implement it. So testing it, understanding it, learning how it works before you implementing it is crucial. And I still think, as I said, we're a year or two off actually people going bullish on it, properly bullish on it and using it in businesses across the globe.
How do you think it's going to impact digital marketing per se? Is it going to result in a reduction of jobs, or do you think it's just going to be a different type of work?
Totally different type of work. So I think it's going to be more... So if we look at SEO, for instance, right, you can already see it when you type into Google because Gemini's owned by Google, whereby it starts to now load up results in a very, very different way. So actually, how is it going to impact SEO? How is it going to impact performance marketing? Because actually it's taking this kind of affiliate approach where it's going, well, I found all this information that I think you might like, so here it is, rather than serving ads through paid or serving ads just through generally good SEO. So I think it's going to be more, I'm looking for something in the future. Can you start to serve me ads that I might find interesting so that I can then buy it, rather than the kind of thing where you're typing into Google coffee machine and you're scrubbing through everything? You'll be able to almost prompt, I'm going on holiday in 2 weeks' time or in a month's time to Tenerife. What is good to do out there? Please start serving me ads. And then it will start to serve you ads, if that makes sense. So you're sort of almost prompting the marketing to come to you, rather than what is currently happening at the moment, which is you have a strategy and you distribute the plan and you target these individuals because you think they might be the right demographic or the right fit or the right individual for your product. It's going to be actually a bit more consumer-led, I reckon, in the next sort of 5 years or so, where consumers literally will ask to be served certain things because they think they might want to see some certain stuff, but they don't actually have the time to search for it.
No, I mean, I've already seen it in our data as well. How people search for us has changed dramatically. We're in the experience market, and people will be coming to us via our YouTube channel, via TikTok, via other mediums, whereas previously they would just search for what they wanted in Google effectively, and we would come up as top. Whereas now, it's almost like an answers coming up in Gemini, and it's telling you what these are the companies best to use based on what you've put in, and it's a completely different way of doing it. It's changed PPC as well, and it's going to change all the different ways that company have, well, I guess traditionally marketed in the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's going to change hugely, but you're going to have to understand how to drive essentially the tech to be able to maximize that. So whilst AI is going to change the way people work and it will put people out of jobs, it will also then create jobs because people will need to be able to drive, able to prompt, able to build out workflows. There'll be jobs in the next year or two that are essentially prompt engineers, whereby agencies are hiring these prompt engineers to build out prompt workflows for clients so that actually their content online is coming up when people are prompting it, right?
This podcast is sponsored by Team Building Experiences. If you're planning a team building event, away day, or corporate event, then check out team-building-experiences.co.uk and state podcast 15 in the comments to receive 15% off your proposal. I wanted to go back to when you've invested in AI. You said you've invested in OpenAI. Is that through personally or is that through Pinpoint Media?
So I write angel tickets personally, and I'm in a syndicate, which is why we have access to some of these big blue chips. So it goes through an SPV essentially, which is why we've had SpaceX and OpenAI and Figma and people like that. But I love entrepreneurialism. I love startup businesses. I love scale up businesses. I love just helping, if that makes sense. So some of the businesses that we've gone into have very much been early stage, and it's just a cool brand, cool guys, and I love what they're doing. Others have been a bit more strategic, like, for instance, OpenAI or SpaceX, whereby there is a genuine growth trajectory there. So some are just for the love of it. Others are more strategic, but it is all personal.
Okay. No, interesting. No, I just wondered because, yeah, it's something that I've been looking into, whether it's something that we, like you say with Google and, Yahoo going back 20 years, the spike, it started where it was and then it started to go absolutely huge, 10, 15 years later. It's how to get in at the bottom, isn't it, before it explodes?
Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult sometimes to get access to them, but as angel tickets and just investing generally is becoming more and more accessible to more and more people. And there are syndicates out there and there are groups and communities whereby investing is at the heart of them. And writing angel tickets doesn't have to be for, hugely wealthy individuals. You can write an angel ticket for hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds, whatever. You look at Crowdcube, right? The whole purpose of Crowdcube is to bring individuals into businesses that maybe have a bright future ahead of them, but you can buy in for 30, 40 quid, right? So actually it is far more accessible than it ever has been, as is creating content, which is kind of, I guess, the learnings of this podcast maybe is everything is just more accessible.
Yeah, definitely. I read a stat earlier today. It was 30% of entrepreneurs in this country have either ADHD or dyslexic. I notice your passion for entrepreneurs and getting involved in that side of things. For those out there, what is your kind of a typical day for Oliver in a obviously Pinpoint Media?
Yeah. I mean, I bought one of these Whoop watches recently because I'm trying to manage and monitor actually what my stress levels look like and what my fatigue is, etc., in sleep, because I do too much, if that makes sense. So I get up very early in the morning and go to the gym. I go to the gym not necessarily because I want to be part of the 5 a.m. club, but just because that's the way that I can sort of switch off, but also kind of just get in my own headspace. So start off at the gym and then come into the office before people get into the office. And then I have a schedule which I try and work through. But again, having ADHD and being neurodiverse, I just don't get through it in the way that it is written out. And I will chop and change and go around and round and procrastinate in some instances and not get shit done for 3 days when it should have been done today. And it was the simplest of projects. So, for me, I just try and be in the business as much as I possibly can and drive it forwards, even if that is only a small percentile per day. One of my big learnings recently is being around the people within the business and making sure that they too are on the same journey, rather than hiding back and just focusing in a quiet box or just focusing on my own workflow. Being there, being seen, being heard is something that I'm trying to bake into my day-to-day.
So how do you manage your team? Do you have a management team that look after the majority of the staff, or do you do more hands-on?
We have a great SLT. So we've got a good senior leadership team. We've got great managers in the business as well. But again, when you're busy, you sometimes aren't there to be seen and to be heard and to be with the guys, understanding what makes them tick and where they want to get to, which again, I may have taken my eye off the ball over the last, year or two with regards to how that looks and where I should be putting my time. So what I'm trying to do more and more now is, even though we have a great management team, try and sit down with guys, have a beer with them, have a coffee with them, just grab lunch with them when they're in the office, just to understand what actually motivates and makes them tick. Because business is not about the pounds and the pennies, and it's not necessarily about coming up with the ideas. Whilst that is a part of it, you can do bugger all if you haven't got people around you. So making sure that everybody's on that same journey with you and that you are engaging and motivating them as best you possibly can is crucial. And people that don't do that maybe are putting some of their time in the wrong place. If you put 10, 20, 30% of your time into your team, that is crucial. That will make a massive difference.
Yeah. So do you have an office? Is it one location or do you have multiple locations?
So 3 locations. So we've got a space over in Cape Town. We work over in Cape Town. We've got an office in Old Street in central London. And then we've got an office in Cheltenham, if anyone knows Cheltenham, along the promenade.
Okay. So I imagine that when you say you're going into the office, is that the Cheltenham one, or do you try to split your time amongst all the offices?
Yeah. Split my time, although I haven't made it out to Cape Town this year. I have still got a ticket, but it keeps getting pushed back. So maybe I'll go out this year. But I go to London twice a week and then Cheltenham for the rest of it. So I live in Cheltenham, so I try and top and tail the week in Cheltenham essentially, and then go to London sort of Wednesdays and Thursdays.
So why Cape Town?
Cape Town's got amazing talent, amazing staff. We've invested in a business out there, web dev business out there. And the level of talent is unbelievable, and it's not a massive time difference. Maximum 2 hours across any point within the year. English speaking, a lot of them are English speaking, and they work for big agencies in our case, right? So a lot of the businesses that work with individuals out in Cape Town are large organisations, large agencies. They want to obviously potentially come over to the UK in time. So there's a huge pool of great talent out there. And we can pass cost savings on to clients if it's 24, 25 rand to the pound. So in some instances, we're able to really pass that on to the clients that are struggling or that are a smaller brand or smaller business, for instance, to make sure that we're not just this big, ugly, overly robust agency. And again, that's why we've also got a regional office, because we can pass those savings on because salaries are 20% less outside of London, give or take, to our clients. So it was a strategic decision, not just because it's got nice weather.
Thought it might be that. I was like, well, I was looking around trying to find out where was the nicest place to go to, and I thought Cape Town seems...
It's a fucking cool place. I love it out there. It's an amazing place, and the guys are just so chilled and so cool. We could learn a lot from them. But yeah, it was strategic, not because I wanted to go out there.
So your love of entrepreneurship, you had a podcast.
I did.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so I started the podcast in the pandemic at that kind of inflection point of taking a step back and wanting to figure out what the hell we're going to do with life and business. So I started this podcast called Successes in the Mind, to literally talk to entrepreneurs and founders on multiple different levels about the fuck-ups, essentially. What makes them tick? What have they done well? What have they done badly? But primarily at the point that I started it was what was going well at that point and how were they getting through certain processes that the pandemic was throwing up. Anyway, we started to get some really cool businesses on there, and I had a good community of friends and people that I'd met in business that I could call up for the first sort of 6 episodes. But then it started to kind of spiral and grow, and we got, from an agency landscape point of view, we had Martin Soren on there who, grew S4 Capital to $1 billion within the first year, through obvious ways. He'd had a pretty good career prior to that. As well as other amazing entrepreneurs that had started up and buggered up, basically. And then it got picked up by Virgin Atlantic. So because we did this whole thing as an agency completely organically off our own backs, we didn't really have to sell the show. We didn't really have to cover any costs because it was what we did and we had a bit of time on our hands. So we really doubled down on the quality. Then Virgin Atlantic picked it up and decided to air it on their in-flight entertainment, Vera. And they said, look, we haven't got any budget at the moment to pay anyone for content, so no one's given us content because it costs them to produce it. So can we have yours? And I went, fucking yes, you can. They shoved it on Vera on Virgin Atlantic, and I think it was only supposed to be on for 6 months, and it's still on there now.
Fantastic. So that's so anyone that's obviously going onto the flight can just literally pop one of your podcasts on, away you go.
Yeah, you can go. I think they've got a Spotify. I think if you go on Vera Virgin Atlantic on Spotify, then you'll see it there. Or if you're on any of the Virgin Atlantic flights, then you can just find it under the podcast section. Success in the Mind. I think there's 6 or 7 episodes on there, which is quite cool because we've had a couple of them. So Cano Water and Hera, 2 brands that were on the show, flew to wherever it was, and they sent me a photo of them listening to their podcast whilst 30,000 feet in the sky.
I love that. Have you got any plans to kind of restart the podcast?
I dabble and I think about it, but I don't think we will. I think the reality is a lot of people are doing podcasts. There's a lot of great podcasts out there, but I don't think we have the time or the passion anymore to put into podcasting, because we recorded them in batches. So it took about 2 weeks to record a series. And then we'd edit it and we'd put production value into it. We'd have it filmed as well. Occasionally we'd go to the location of the entrepreneur as well and shoot it that way. So it was actually a pretty expensive outlay when you actually look at what it would cost if you were to charge it out. Although, at cost price, it was still pretty spenny. So I wouldn't probably start it again, but there are other things that we're looking at doing from a broadcast point of view that sort of turns the podcast on its head and sort of puts it on steroids.
Okay. Can you tell us about that yet?
I actually can't. I might be able to. But it's, I can't, I don't know what I can and can't say. There's other shareholders.
We'll look out for it in the future, that's for sure. Lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to listen to some because, like I said, it's something that I've only just come across, and I love listening to podcasts, obviously podcast host as well. And talking about entrepreneurship is my favourite hobby. So for me, this is like a, absolute dream job, essentially, just speaking to some of the best entrepreneurs in this country. What I wanted to find out a little bit more is, obviously, you've got a big team, a lot of pressure. You were saying, obviously in the pandemic as well, a lot going on there. How do you deal with the stresses and the pressures of running a big business?
I think my stress level at 3 is most people's stress level at 10. And the reason I say that is because over the last 6-8 months, there's been turbulence period in the market, but also prior to that, there's been a number of different things that have happened whereby most people, I think, would buckle, and I can't buckle. It's impossible for me to buckle because I have a duty of care to the people within the business. So for me, I have to just drive on, and I have to make sure that this business is as good as it possibly can be and make strategic decisions. Now, we've got a really good team around us, which I do rely on massively. One of the ways that I've tried to somewhat delegate to them is by letting it become more employee-owned, if that makes sense. So decisions are more driven by the team, which does alleviate some of the stress because you haven't got people consistently asking you to make decisions. Now, being a CEO, being a founder, being an entrepreneur, typically you just get all the shit if you've got a team underneath you, because the good stuff is all covered by the team and happy days, not a problem at all. Most of the bad stuff is covered by the team because the SLT can manage that. But when it's really bad, it has to come up to you. So you have this kind of tarnished kind of way of working whereby you're doing your own stuff and trying to drive the business forwards. You never really get the good news because that stays within the team, but you tend to get the shit news. Which does somewhat become a bit demoralizing. But you just have to look ahead and go, look, are we bigger? Are we better? Are we uglier than we were last year? Even if we haven't hit the KPIs that we wanted to hit, are we just in a better place? Whatever that place might be, and have an element of pragmatism. I often look at, where we set ourselves goals. Are they too punchy? And then where are we now versus where we were last year? And if you're 1%, 2%, 3% bigger and better than you were last year, that's fine. Take it. Don't be greedy. And I think greed is something that so many people go into business and expect or think is a good thing. They go, right, I want to make a fuckload of money. I want to be greedy and I want to win in everything. The reality is that is exactly the wrong thing to do when you're starting a company. You should go into a company to try and make it as good as it can be. Forget about the capital in terms of what will make you feel wealthy and just focus on delivering the best possible product and be nice to everybody. Big lesson I've learned is be nice to everybody. If you're not kind, if you're not nice, if you're not empathetic, if you're not building relationships with people, then when you fall back down, they will shit on you as well. And that, if you can be kind, if you can be empathetic and have a bit of humility and talk to people openly about good and bad things, don't just paint a picture of everything being positive. People will trust and believe in you more than if you're just telling them the good shit all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of that going on LinkedIn, isn't it? Where it's just constantly good news.
LinkedIn is just such a fake platform, but you have to be on there and you have to post shit because people look at it and engage with it. But my God, you look at someone who you think is doing amazingly because they've raised all this money and they've got an amazing brand and an amazing business. Get under the bloody bonnet of the car, look at it, and you'll realize that maybe it ain't as good as it looks.
Yeah, they're shouting from the rooftops because they need help rather than...
Sometimes that's it. Sometimes amazing stories on LinkedIn, just to be clear, and there's amazing things that are happening. But there is also a total element of bullshit that goes with that. And I just think, and that's why when I start the podcast, success is in the mind, because everyone perceives success differently, but arguably everything on social media just looks like everyone's having the best fucking time in the world. And I was sat on the pandemic going, what the hell's going to happen here? How am I going to get out of this sort of rut? So I wanted to talk to other people about it. And they have the same opinion. They have the same understanding and idea that what you see out there is not the truth.
It's almost entrepreneur's curse in a way, that you're constantly pushing for that next thing, and it's hard not to focus on that. You know, we've grown 3% that year. We should be celebrating, but I'm disappointed because our target was 4. You know, that's the trouble, isn't it?
I can remember it so well. We had, before the pandemic, our first £100,000 month, right? We did some stuff. We sold some projects, made 100,000 quid, and we went out and got absolutely fucking rat-ass because it was a huge milestone for us, right? And now you look at it, and we do great things. When we do great things, we forget sometimes to celebrate it. Even if it's only a mildly good thing, we still don't find the time to celebrate it. But we were so much younger then. We were so much hungrier. We went out and celebrated and partied hard. And I think a lot of businesses miss that as they get bigger and as they get older. They don't celebrate the small milestones, and you really should do. We've started to try and do a lot more. We've now got a culture committee in the business, which is specifically around making sure that culture is all about celebrating the wins and actually almost sometimes looking at the losses and going, well, why did we lose that? And talking around it, because if we don't talk around the losses and why we've lost something, we're never going to fix it, right? But I do think you have to celebrate as much as you can, because there's so much shit that gets thrown at you.
Yeah, definitely. So what's the future for Pinpoint Media then? Have you got a structure over the next couple of years?
So we've built out an amazing board. We've managed to build out an amazing SLT. So we're currently hiring a new sales team under our head of growth at the moment. So she came on as part of the acquisition. We hired a head of growth, and her objective and her goal is to build out an amazing sales team. So for us, it's growth, stability, growth, and delivering excellent work to clients. So, you know, we will see where we are at the end of the year. Top line growth is there. Bottom line growth, you know, because we reinvest, because it's organic, because it's an owned business, if that makes sense, with no outside investors. And we do have to invest organically, but we're controlling the EBIT, and we should end up this year in a better position than we've ever been. So it's really exciting in that sense. But growth, essentially.
Brilliant. I've got 3 quick fire questions for you, Oliver. First one is, what is the best business advice you've ever been given?
There's no good time to start a business, but in business, you should always have a good time.
Love that. What advice would you give someone trying to start a business in 2024?
Listen, and it's never too early to take advice, genuinely. You might think that you need to start something up, learn a little bit, and then go and ask for help. Fuck it, just ask for help from day one, because it'll expedite the process.
Excellent. And final one is, what podcast or books would you recommend someone reading or listening to if they're looking to start a business?
So books, I don't read much. I just listen to audiobooks. Being dyslexic, it takes me about a year to read anything. But podcasts, obviously yours. Obviously Success is in the Mind. Gary Vee has some amazing podcasts. So if you actually listen to Gary Vee, people love and hate him. He's like Marmite, but he does have some really interesting opinions. And then obviously there's the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphrey. And it's interesting that you mentioned that earlier because of what we're doing with this new idea and the connection there.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, once that's launched, we'll be able to put a reference back to this point and link it in.
And you can do. You give it 3 months, you'll be able to do that.
So, finally, how can people find more about Pinpoint Media and yourself, Oliver?
They're obviously LinkedIn. If you type in Oliver Bruce, I'll pop up, I think. Pinpoint-media.co.uk will be the URL. Or you can go onto Google and type in Pinpoint Media, and we'll pop up in London, we'll pop up in Cheltenham. And if you're listening to it in Cape Town, then just let me know, because it'd be amazing.
That's lovely. It's been brilliant having you on today, Oliver. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Well, that was another episode of We Built This Business. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you could do one thing for me, either like, follow, or subscribe to the channel on your podcast listening app, enables us to grow the show. Thank you.